Show, and Kyle Olson, founder of The Midwesterner.
Hey. Can you guys hear me? I don't know. Is my mic working? Yes, it is.
There we go.
Hello. All right, so this is going to be a little bit of a different panel. I feel like this is going to be kind of like the ruckus panel that is going to give you the real download of what's happening behind the scenes, because we shouldn't call this the media panel. We should call this the Fighting the Fake News panel.
Yeah.
A lot of fighting the fake news is making sure that the story that goes out there is actually the true story or the full story, because we've found that, interestingly, getting into the political world on the other side of the media, we found that the media really does lie to you on a regular basis. This is a group of men who have been standing up against that. And actually, Tom, I'm glad that you're here with us today, because Tom came to me a few months ago and he said, I am stepping out of my position. I have been admonished for my views on talk radio. Yeah, I just want you to chat a little bit about that, because think about talk radio, which is historically opinion,
Yes.
telling you your opinion sucks.
Not only that, you can't share your opinion that sucks. So in reality, listen, I came out of the journalism industry. It was an industry I loved. I grew up as a child pretty much wanting to be a journalist, and I studied it and I took it very seriously. And it was very, very important that we were not forming a public opinion. We were simply informing the public about what was going on. Somewhere along the road, the journalism industry lost its way. And I was in the midst of that. And I started in the 1990s. I quit journalism in 2021, January, because of what happened all throughout 2020. It's an industry that has been co-opted by, accurately saying, the far left. And it had been for some time, quite some time. So instead of pretending we were being objective, I decided to get into the analysis, the opinion side of the media. And ironically, at the same time that the news media was sharing their opinions, talk radio was saying, stop sharing your opinion. And so the roles were inverted in this, and I was stunned by it, but yes, that's exactly what happened in my experience.
And media has gone through quite a few changes in the past few years. You've seen the changes in the podcast world alone. You saw Donald Trump took a different approach to his last campaign and went out and talked on a lot of different podcasts. Well, I think that during these past few years, a lot of us have learned quite a bit about how different media is and why it is important to fight it with alternative forms of media. And Kyle Olson, he actually worked with me on the campaign, and then when he got out of the campaign, he said, this is ridiculous. I mean, we went through a pandemic with a tyrant governor who shut down the entire state, who harmed our children, who damaged our businesses, closed 3,000 restaurants, and the media wouldn't touch it. And that's when he was inspired to form The Midwesterner. So I just want you to give a little bit of background on what The Midwesterner is and how you decided that you could actually cover the real news.
Sure, and in fact, I said we can either keep complaining about the Michigan media and what they choose to focus on, or we can create something new and focus on the things that so many other people care about. And so what we have seen is, you take, for example, one of the first big stories that we focused on was this proposed Goshen battery plant in Mecosta County in near Big Rapids. And so what we did, and I'm sure many of you have heard about that, but basically what Governor Whitmer was trying to do was give over $700 million to a Chinese company to buy 1 square mile of property in Mecosta County to create a battery plant. And it was what I guess maybe she didn't know or she didn't care, but Chinese companies are directly related to the CCP. And if you're inviting the CCP into your country, what do you think that's going to do? And one of the most ironic things about that whole situation was it is 100 miles. That proposed location was 100 miles from Camp Grayling. And we have written stories about the US military is training Taiwanese forces to repel a Chinese invasion at Camp Grayling. So here we are, Americans, training Taiwanese forces at Camp Grayling, and yet 100 miles away, she wants to give them $700 million to build a Chinese battery plant. So what we did was we went and live streamed the township meetings. We told their stories. We got their clips out. We made that a national story to the point where President Trump talked about Goshen by name. J.D. Vance did a rally right across the street. It made it a national issue. And you look at what's happening with the EV market today, and I think it's reasonable to say that Goshen will not be happening in Big Rapids.
The Goshen story was actually a big turning point for conservatives, I think, in general, because we were lied to about what it was. The entire state was lied to about what it was. I've been in manufacturing the majority of my life. This is a new world to me. So when we were actually on the road and we got the message that we were going to put all of this money, the state was going to put all of this money into a Chinese battery factory. And I said, I will say that I got a lot of grief from people on my team that I didn't do enough videos because I just feel corny making a video of myself when I just feel like, hey, look, I'm here eating cherry pie, But this was a moment where I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, I know about this, I'd like manufacturing is my jam. I understand that China shut a lot of our businesses down. They took a lot of our work. They're pirates. But I also know one thing, there is not a single Chinese company that is not connected to the CCP. And we stopped on the side of the road and we did this video, and the next day, man, the media pounced on that, and WJR asked me to come on, and I thought, still naive, they want to know more about how bad this Goshen plant is. That was so funny. That was not what they wanted to know. Man, I got hammered on, so you don't believe in bringing jobs to Mecosta County? What do you have to say to the people of Mecosta County? And I said that we're going to protect them from the Chinese Communist Party. And that was kind of when I think a lot of us realized. And Justin, you also started talking about this, and you were amazed by once people started to learn the truth. We had been hearing for years that the biggest threat to the United States was China, and we were going to have them in our backyard.
China. I'm sorry. I've been waiting this whole time and to do that because we actually have that when on the show we have President Trump saying China. So every time we talk about this story, we have to play it. Not only is it memorable, but I also think it underscores the absurdity of the whole thing. Because to your point, and the way this was all handled, it was pushed down the throats of the people of Green Charter Township in the Big Rapids area in Mecosta County. A lot of deals were signed in back rooms. Smoke-filled, I'm sure, in Lansing and other places, maybe even in Beijing, I don't know. But the people in Green Charter Township were never asked. And so when this story came up, it was hot. Congressman John Molinar, who was up here just a moment ago, has been absolute fantastic throughout the entire process, fighting for the people there. And Tudor, you bringing it to the forefront, and the Midwesterner being a champion for the voice of the people, where they really haven't had that up until this point. In recent years, everything else is just sort of getting pushed through business as usual, and the narrative being crafted and formed behind the scenes to where people don't even have a say. Not anymore.
And I'll just add to that, the idea that elected officials will sign non-disclosure agreements so then they can't go and talk to their taxpayers who are asking very legitimate questions about what are you doing to our community. We can't answer that because we signed an NDA.
And they will lie that they signed those NDAs. And this is how the media protects these particular politicians. And I'll name one politician that we know signed a non-disclosure agreement. And that was Alyssa Slotkin, now a senator in the state, at the time a member of Congress. We were gearing up to interview her on our show at WJR regarding this exact same thing. In the prior segment, I was discussing what we knew at that point about Alyssa Slotkin's involvement with these NDAs regarding Goshen. Well, when she heard what I had said, we got a text message to my producer saying she is now refusing to come on the program based on what Tom Jordan had just said. Not to come on to refute it, because we have the evidence, we have her signature. Not only that, her excuse was that, well, I had my staff sign the non-disclosure agreement. If that was the case, are you telling me that you're having your staff, an unelected part of your organization, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and is your staff now breaking that NDA because aren't they telling you what's in that agreement? I mean, there's so many things that are wrong about this. But my
Hasn't
greater...
she heard of the auto pen? I mean, the auto pen is you, right?
Yes, of course. The auto pen is just, I think, a figurative, it's a figure of what's happening to her. So the idea that basically this was happening, denying it, and then when it comes out, the fact of the matter is we have a media complex right now that is defending all they can. And when you appeared on WJR, it wasn't my show, by the way, when you were getting pushback. The media is so protective right now of the Democratic Party because they are Democrats. 98, 99% of all reporters, all journalists, they grew up in basically the curriculum in which they were schooled in is steeped in Marxism that has been taught. This is absolutely the case. It started with Columbia University back in the 1930s when the European elites came to this country. And they started to indoctrinate the universities, the academics. They, in turn, indoctrinated their students. And now pretty much all journalism students in major public universities are steeped in this idea of critical theory that came from Germany. And now it's obviously you see what's happening in our country. That's the journalist of today.
Yes, and I think we have seen in the past few years that media has become the communications arm of the Democrat Party. We've seen this happening, but we've seen a slippery slope in a very dangerous way because for years now, the Democrats have come out and called speech violence. This has been a trend for the last few years in the mainstream media because now we have 24 hours of news. We were talking before the panel, when we were kids, our parents would sit down for the evening news and that was all the news they got for the day, you know? So you had like a 3-minute hit of what was happening in the nation. Now, you have news 24 hours a day, but I've got news for you. There's not 24 hours of news. So it's opinion and it starts to get radical. And they say speech is violence. And if you can say that speech is violence, then you can convince people you should respond to speech with violence. So instead of sitting down and having the discussion, because if you listen to Bill Maher, he recently came out and he said, look, Republicans, you might not like them, but they'll sit here. They'll come and sit with me. They'll talk. The other side is unwilling to talk. It's created a huge problem across our country that the other side is unwilling to talk, and it's now to the point where it's put us in danger. And the crazy thing is, after we saw what happened last week with Charlie Kirk, we had so many conservatives continue speaking, and they said, we are Charlie Kirk. Well, then contrast, but then you contrast that message with how they try to hijack our messages, and you've got Jimmy Kimmel that gets fired because he sucks. Like, if your job is to be funny and you're not funny, you're allowed to be fired. And the worst part about it is that this was a guy whose show cost millions of dollars to produce, and he was getting less viewers than one of my podcasts. And we're doing it with like 2 people.
That's because your podcasts rock.
But the problem that we have with this is then you have Colbert come out and say, we are all Jimmy Kimmel. No. A week later. And And they completely twist this. And so I want to, Kyle, I want to go to you on this because you've been out there fighting for the First Amendment. But the First Amendment doesn't mean that a company that is losing money on you and having sponsors pull has to keep you because you're a leftist.
Right. Well, the First Amendment protects you from the government. It doesn't protect you from corporations or your employer. So if I go out and, say something horrible, I can expect to be fired. That's natural. But it's also interesting to see some of these people play out on social media where when Tucker Carlson was fired, that was great. But now that Jimmy Kimmel is fired, that is, we're hearing all these horrible things about Donald Trump and everything. But you're right. I think Clay Travis said yesterday his ratings were down to 100 and some thousand per episode. Think about that. He's getting millions of dollars a year. He's got this show on network television, and he's significantly under 1 million. That is a business decision at the end of the day. That it just doesn't work.
We have also, we've seen all of these people that you brought up, the fact that people can get fired. We've seen all of these people that have been fired recently from their jobs for saying hideous things about the death of Charlie Kirk and the murder of Charlie Kirk. And people on the left have said, how can you call out these people? And I think people have been encouraging folks, and Justin, you've probably also been encouraging folks to come out and say, if you see someone who has said something horrible, then their employers should know. You should call them out for it. And I will say, for those of you who go, I don't know, should I get involved? I'm just going to be a little vulnerable here for a moment. Last year, I'm old, so I had to go in for my colonoscopy. And I go in, I told you, I was going to be vulnerable. I go in and I walk in the door and everybody in the hospital is like, hey, Tudor, how are you? I'm like, this is very uncomfortable. And hi. So I go in and I'm like in the room waiting for the doctor to come in and talk to me, and the anesthesiologist comes in and he was like, so how was the campaign? I'm like, this feels weird. And he goes, I just want you to know I voted for you. And I thought, thank God. Because what if he hadn't, But that's why when people go, is it fair to call these people out? You don't know who's getting a colonoscopy the next day. So yes, it is fair. But Justin, you talk about that. You call these people out every day. It's important, right?
First of all, that is entirely unfair. Nobody should ever have to follow that. We'll have to talk later. I did something with a box, and I don't want to talk about it here, but you don't have to do the colonoscopy thing and worry about that.
They say that's not as accurate.
I do think about that, but I think about all of these things because I think about, my kids, and I think about my wife and my family and the people that have to deal with these things. And so, look, I've heard it said a couple of different ways, and I think even Clay mentioned this last night. This isn't cancel culture. This is accountability. And I like to call it the find out era. Yeah. When you fool around, you're going to find out. There are consequences. You don't have a right to say whatever you want to say and have a right to a job or to a network television show. Your employer has a right to know if you're someone who's celebrating the horrific assassination of another human being, a father with 2 little kids who left this world far too soon because of all the evil that we're seeing perpetrated and pushed out there by some of these folks who don't realize that there are consequences to what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Charlie's death is bigger than, it's one of those situations where we will all remember where we were. Our kids will all remember where they were. My daughter came home from high school and she said that all of the kids, they'd heard, think about, they hear it in the middle of the day, he was shot. They're in a different world than we are because they've got it right in their hands. They go to their locker between classes and they're trying to get an update. She said as kids were walking out of school that day, they were crying. They go to a Christian school, so we feel very blessed about that. And we're allowed to talk about the fact that we pray and we have a God that's bigger than this. And that Charlie was a warrior for free speech here, and he is in glory with God right now. But it's hard to talk about that in the media. And so I wanted to go to you on that, Tom. When you hear about this situation, and we've seen all these beautiful videos of what a true loving relationship was, and things that I don't think we would have seen about Erica and Charlie had this not happened. And that makes this legacy of Christian love and that three-strand rope of marriage come to life in a different way. How do you talk about your Christianity?
Acts chapter 4 says, we were thinking about Peter and John. They were arrested for what? For speaking about Jesus. And they said, we cannot help but speak about the things that we have seen and heard. They couldn't help speaking about it. And back then, they were trying to shut them down. They were trying to shut down the truth, right? So I absolutely believe that what Charlie Kirk stood for, the political positions he came to were based on biblical principles. And first and foremost, he was a Christian. He was a follower of Jesus Christ. I know his pastors, and they were, Calvary Chapel out in California and then in Arizona. He was committed to the Lord. And from that relationship that he had and his wife Erica has, and that support they had for one for another, when you try to shut that down, what did Jesus say? The gates of hell shall not overcome it. Because there is a strength to truth. So whenever you're being called to shut up, to be quiet, I had Representative Haley Stevens tell me specifically, because I am a man, I am not allowed to speak. On the air, live. She violated so many of my rights as an American citizen. She also violated her own oath to uphold the Constitution in that very moment, without any acknowledgement that she had done all those horrific things. Specifically, I am a man, you have to shut up. I have a 20-year-old son because of Charlie Kirk. And he told me this after Charlie was killed that very day. He said, you know what Charlie's done for me? And it's true. He's been watching Charlie Kirk now for a couple of years. He has given me the courage to speak out about objective reality. They can tell us that what we're seeing isn't true, but I have two eyes, and I can see that they are lying to me. And too many people his age, my son's age, 20 years old, are sick and tired of being lied to and sick and tired of being told to shut up. We address people with kindness, with love, but in firmness and conviction that what we believe in is true. So we can't but speak of the things that we have heard and seen.
Some of I think, I'm sorry, you should clap for that. Some of the debates that I saw that I thought were the most impactful were the ones where a young woman would come up who had been indoctrinated by the abortion message of there is only, if you take away abortion, then all these people who are going to die in childbirth will never have a chance at life. And how do you answer that? And Charlie was so good at explaining that's not true. Just as you said, this is not the truth. There's so many more. And he would say, okay, I will give you that. If you take those, even if it's 2,500, if you take those and we say we're going to allow that, what about the 1.6 million? What about the 60 million babies that have been aborted? What do we say about that? Can we compromise on abortion up to the moment of birth? And this is something that people have been struggling to talk about. And we certainly saw it in 22, that it is a complicated message because the media took this over and they lied about it. And they lied about it in 22 instead of telling, You know, they would interview me and I would say, the people are going to choose this. The governor has no choice. They lied to the point where one of the stations came out and said, but we talked to Governor Whitmer, and even if you vote for this, the governor can change it. Not true. This harmed the state so badly. Look at where we are right now. No additional jobs, more manufacturers leaving. The governor is on a constant vacation. This is, I mean, she's on a constant vacation because she is trying to say she has these foreign policy chops. She's taking our taxpayer money to go on vacations that she thinks are going to be able to help her win the presidency. There was no competing media when I was running for office to tell the truth about the abortion message and about Whitmer. And you saw that. You saw that, and you were inspired in that moment to say, and I will say the entire time Kyle was going, this woman has destroyed the state. And it is so, Republicans always have less money, but it is so hard to fight when you have a dishonest media.
Right. I was at Breitbart at the time during the Sorry, I stepped on that. I was at Breitbart at the time during the pandemic. And so I was watching her press conferences. I was, reading all the executive orders and all these, new rules and hypocrisies and conflicts and everything. And it was crazy to me to see how compliant the media was. But then also when, someone like me was just trying to ask basic questions, well, you couldn't even get access. You couldn't get, and so it was very tightly controlled. And so, I was really trying to get to the bottom of exactly what she was doing. And when you do that, it's interesting how, some of the sources that you develop. And so you may remember when she went to, she went to the bar. We exposed that. She issued an order saying,
I'm
all
sure
of
she
us
goes to the bar a lot. I think he means during the pandemic.
during the pandemic. You remember that when she had she went to the Land Shark. Anyway, but then she would issue these executive orders, and I remember when she told all of us, don't go to Florida for spring break. And she was concerned about snowbirds coming back from Florida. So she told all of us, don't go to Florida for spring break. But then we find out her own health director, who is still employed, went to Alabama for spring break. And the COO of the state of Michigan went to Florida. Zero accountability, no accountability for that. And so she was a hypocrite through the entire thing. And then during your campaign, what I found was the Michigan media wanted to talk about abortion because she was spending tens of millions of dollars on TV ads to change the subject away from the pandemic. And they wanted to talk about Donald Trump and the latest thing that Donald Trump said. And he said this, what's your reaction to that? This is what they wanted to focus on. They did not want to focus on shutting down schools, crushing restaurants, eliminating hundreds of thousands of jobs. Well, let's just move past that.
And they were so successful in attacking President Trump. I think there's two things that happened during 2022. They went after the abortion message to a point where just last week there was a poll done that said out of 13 questions, young women who voted for Kamala Harris put the importance of having a family as second to last. Because you have to understand, it went beyond saying we want this to be safe, legal, and rare. It was shout your abortion. You should not be burdened with children. These young women were told you can't do it all. Think about the irony of that coming from Gretchen Whitmer. Here's a woman who for a while was a single mom and was running her campaign based on the fact I'm a single mom and I have to take care of my sick mother who is dying of cancer and doesn't have health insurance. And then just a few years later, she wins an election by telling other people you don't want the burden of being a mother. I mean, the irony of that message flipped like that, and the media never calling her out on it. I spoke in Indiana last weekend, and it was like, we walked in, it was so different. We walked in, and the senator was having this event, and he had mugs with his name on it for everybody to take home. And I was like, gosh, I feel like I've come out from under a rock. I'm like, how did you get money for mugs? You know, come to Michigan. What is happening here? You know, but they were joyfully talking about all of the messages that we talk about every day, the moral clarity, the message of family and the Lord. And they were not ashamed. And I want us to, if we take one thing away from what happened last week, that is to not be ashamed to speak about the things that we believe in, the things that we care about, and the importance of family and faith. And that's something that you are able to do every single day. I've watched you. I have been jealous of your ability to talk about your faith, but you do not shy away from it on the radio, and you are incredibly successful. So share what that's like.
Well, thank you. 2020 is what turned the tide for me. I was doing radio, but really was doing it kind of the way that I think most folks in the media are operating, without a purpose other than, hey, I'm just going to do this for myself, climbing a corporate ladder and all those things. But in 2020, everything changed. We saw the world turned upside down, and blatantly we were told we were wrong. They lied to our face on lots of things, told we couldn't talk about certain things. Speaking of free speech, I don't know how many in this room were canceled off of social media or shadow banned and all over. I mean, I certainly was. And for, telling you news stories they were news stories. I can cover this one, but I can't cover that one. And so at some point we kind of became, through the digital platform, not just through radio, but through Facebook and all these other ways that people could get us, podcasts, et cetera, this voice where people could hear some of the truth. And so people would come to me and say, what's going to happen here? What's going to happen there? And my faith background, the only answer I could give them is, I don't know, but I know that God is still on the throne. And even through some of the most chaotic days of that time. And so since then, we've gone through quite a bit, but I've come to understand, and Tom and I had a great conversation about this last night. This is what I do, but that's why I do it. And it's what Charlie was doing. We're putting the truth inside of the truth.
That is wonderful. That is exactly why we do this. And I think that we have an opportunity to fight back against that narrative. We recently had our faith attacked in the state of Michigan, in Dearborn. There is a mayor in Dearborn right now who had a man come to a town meeting, and he made some comments, and I'll let Kyle explain it because you had this story and you're telling the full story. I want Kyle to explain it because I just want you to know that when the news went there, they told a totally different story than the truth. So Kyle can share.
Well, there was, so the city of Dearborn wanted to name a street after someone who runs the Arab News, who's very controversial. He's close to Gretchen Whitmer. He's gone on at least one trip with her overseas. And so there was a individual resident of the city came up and spoke his piece, said this is controversial, we shouldn't be doing this. I'm paraphrasing. And the mayor said to him, what was significant to me about it was that the mayor invoked his office and said, as mayor, in a public meeting, and then said, you are not welcome here. And it's, if the details were any different, it would be a national story. And so it's, our story ended up on the Drudge Report. It went viral, but it's these sorts of stories that I think don't get enough attention, and they absolutely need to.
He also told the Christian the day that he leaves Dearborn, the mayor is going to throw a parade in honor that the Christian left Dearborn. Fox News did pick that up, by the way, thanks to you.
And I think it's important to note that we have a group of people that we are so close to in that community. And we may have a different faith path, but we have the same values path, and we are Americans. And those folks who looked at that mayor, and he has an election coming up, but when they look at that mayor, they said, that's not who we are. That is the division that, and the news helped that division along, because they talked about the man who they were naming the street after as this great pillar of the community. But the concerns that the person had who came to the meeting was, this man has praised one of the people who was involved in the October 7th attack. And we don't want to give somebody this honor of having a street named after them. Is there something we can do to talk you out of this? This is free speech. This is the forum that you go to have that conversation. It wasn't allowed by the mayor. The mayor said, you are not welcome here. I will celebrate the day you're gone. If that had happened in any other city, the media would be freaking out about it. That's why I think these guys, we called this the media panel. These are the rebels. They all had the Justin Barclay moment where it was, this isn't just a career. What am I doing? And I gotta tell you, in local media, there's not a lot of climbing the ladder. You're not going home and to your mansion with your Ferraris. You are fighting for the people. That's what these guys do every day. I want to thank them for being here. I want to thank them for what they do and sharing that with us and fighting for us every day. Thank you, guys.